After 4 years since its initial release, I decided to play most of the mainline Resident Evil games, including the first two from 1996 and 1998, which are Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2, after, really enjoying the recent remakes and Resident Evil 7. The next one on my list was Resident Evil Village, or RE8, which I specifically chose to play as part of sort of my preparation for next year's Resident Evil Requiem. After finishing both the main story and the DLC, I'm genuinely happy with the experience. It gave me confidence to buy the next game in the series without hesitation. So in this video, I will share my thoughts on the gameplay, story, and some other aspects I found worth highlighting. And most importantly, whether Resident Evil Village is worth your time and also money.
Death. Yes. Death has visited them all.
I like to play Resident Evil games with a controller, and this one wasn't any difference, but both input methods are solid. In the few moments I played with mouse and keyboard, the game felt great, no weird input delays or awkward quirks that some other developers include, and this is usually due to them mainly creating the game for consoles and not for PC, so shout out to Capcom for that, or the developers at least. And with a controller, it's your standard gameplay experience with no major issues. In fact, also most speedruns of this game are done with mouse and keyboard, so definitely no complaints in the input department. You can use both inputs and they will work perfectly well. That said, when it comes to gameplay, I do have one small complaint. I'm not sure if this has happened to everyone or if this happens to everyone, but I noticed about a half a second pause between certain actions, like interacting with objects or doing a quick turn. The game would kind of freeze me for a split second before executing the action. Well, it wasn't before executing the action, now that I remember, it was like after. I would like press something, and then after just hitting that, then it will take like half a second to then react to my inputs again. So it was after executing the action. It's not a huge deal, and I think it might be intentional from the developers at least to sort of make the experience feel more consistent for casual players. But if you like to go all in during fights and care about smooth transitions between movements, you will definitely feel that pause. And it's definitely most noticeable during boss fights or high pressure moments when you require to move fast. But aside from that weird half a second freeze with some actions, the gameplay is an upgrade from RE7, not necessarily in huge ways, but it really polishes the FPS perspective or the first person shooter gameplay. The guns feel great, the movement is the same as RE7, which is a good thing, and they reintroduced the inventory system from the original RE4. And thank God there is no quicksort button. You have to actually organize the items manually. Crafting items and story/key items are separated from the main inventory, so you never have to worry about backtracking just to grab a key item, which is something very noticeable in the first games at least. And of course, Resident Evil 0, which I haven't played, but that's basically the main complaint. And it is a great improvement, and honestly I think it's the way forward for Resident Evil, to keep story/key items and also crafting items separated from the actual inventory, since I personally don't think limiting story or key items adds anything meaningful. It was just annoying, so having them in their own section, not taking up actual space, is a fantastic change. Gun progression also feels really good throughout most of the game. The only downside is that near the end there are a lot of scripted scenes, and the last couple of weapons are introduced very late, basically right before the final stretch, so I didn't really get to enjoy them much. But other than that, weapon progression is solid. It's not something that stands out as amazing, but it feels just as good as it did in the RE4 remake, in my opinion. They also introduced a new vendor called the Duke, who lets you buy, sell, and upgrade your weapons. And on top of that, there's a new mechanic where in the village you can hunt animals like fish, pigs, chickens, goats, and sheep. I think that's almost all of them, and get so-called ingredients. You can bring that to the Duke, who who has quote-unquote recipes that grant permanent health or defense upgrades, depending on, of course, the ingredients that you get and the recipes that are available. It's a neat addition that adds quite a little bit of depth to the vendor system, so I really appreciate that little addition. Gameplay wise, this game is clearly inspired by the original RE4. You can see that in so many ways, so if you're an RE4 fan, there's a good chance you will really enjoy the gameplay in RE Village. It might not feel as perfect as RE4 did, but I think they came pretty close to recapturing that RE4 feel, at least on the gameplay side, of course. Resident Evil Village is a direct sequel to RE7, continuing the story of Ethan Winters. I won't spoil much because I'd rather you experience it for yourself, but overall I found the story to be just plain enjoyable. There are some major callbacks toward the end that connect to the original Resident Evil lore, along with explanations for certain things that happen in RE7, which help make Ethan's story feel more complete. That said, one of the biggest criticisms, either with the story itself or a subject closely related to it, is the writing and dialogue, which, yeah, it's laughably bad. I've always seen the Resident Evil games more for the setting, the environments, and the overall plot, not the actual writing itself. I've kind of come to expect that the dialogue will be weak in RE games, or not necessarily weak, but just something that doesn't make much sense, at least from my perspective. But what makes it worse in RE8 compared to other entries is that in serious emotional moments where Ethan should actually react in a human way, his delivery is completely flat, like he's just reading off a script. There's barely any emotion. And while Resident Evil games have always walked that line between comedy and seriousness, of course depending on the situation, here the comedy, I could say, is still sort of there, but it's hard to take the protagonist seriously when both the writing and voice acting fall so flat. Another issue with the story is the number of loose ends and just straight up nonsensical moments. There are times where the game builds something up and puts a lot of emphasis on it, only for it to go nowhere, and you're left wondering why even bring that up if it's not going to lead to anything meaningful. This ties directly into the bad writing combined with Ethan's emotionless delivery. You will often find yourself thinking, why is he doing this, or why he didn't react faster or use common sense. For me, Ethan honestly comes off like an immortal dumbass, to be put in the most honest way. That's how I felt playing as Ethan. But like I said, I've come to expect this kind of writing from Resident Evil, so those weird or dumb moments didn't really bother me much. Still, I'll say that the story is easily the weakest part of Resident Evil Village. It is not bad, but it is the weakest part nonetheless.
Lady, supersized bitch, ugly ass psycho doll, an embryonic freak.
One of the main criticisms I've heard about the level design or the village as a whole is the backtracking. Initially, I was worried it would be annoying or poorly handled by these reviews from before that I played the game, but honestly, it wasn't bad at all. Yes, there is backtracking, but in my opinion, it didn't feel frustrating. In fact, I saw it more as a chance to explore the village at my own pace. It reminded me of how I explored other Resident Evil games, like the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis from 1999. Of course, the remake is quite bad at that, or the first Resident Evil from 1996. Even in places like the Spencer Mansion or Raccoon City, there was backtracking, and I always enjoyed those parts. I feel like they gave me a chance to look around more closely, and RE8 gave me that same feeling. Also, I think the backtracking in RE8 works because whenever you enter a new area, it's actually very linear. So to me, it's a good mix of linear progression with moments of freedom to explore. Overall, I really like the village itself, not so much for its layout, but more for what I will talk about next, which is the art design. I would honestly replay this game for two reasons. First, the gameplay, and second, the art design and environment. The art direction in RE8 is one of its biggest highlights, especially the castle, which really sets the tone for the game's overall gothic sort of aesthetic. Each one of the main characters also have a distinct visual design that reflects their personality and backstory. Every time you enter a new area tied to one of these characters, it truly feels unique, with the standouts being Lady Dimitrescu and Benevento. For example, Lady Dimitrescu's areas features a beautiful sort of European style castle with some really nice level design. It includes elegant rooms and an outdoor courtyard, dark catacombs beneath the castle, and a generally rich atmosphere. Then there's the Benevento section, which starts off as a simple house but quickly turns into something straight out of RE7. It's an incredible change of pace that drops you into a horror heavy sequence, well, of course, depending on who plays it, right in the middle of an otherwise action-packed game. Personally, I've always loved castles in sort of that gothic inspired architecture, and the village itself feels like it was pulled straight out of a medieval setting. I was generally just happy, like just walking around and taking everything in. That might also be why I didn't mind the backtracking. I was always like stopping to admire the details. So yeah, no doubt about it, the art design and environments are some of the best parts of this game. The Shadows of Rose DLC is a short but honestly interesting DLC that expands on Rose's character and provides a bit more closure to the main story. But if you're only interested in the story, I wouldn't say it's worth sort of the extra cost on its own. The DLC is pretty short. I finished it in about 2 hours and 30 minutes. That feels like the right length for something priced between $5 to $10, but it doesn't offer a lot of new content and also not a lot of story itself. You will go through the same areas from the base game, just in a different order and with some minor changes. There are no major new locations or standout gameplay mechanics that make it like a must play on its own. But that said, the Resident Evil Village like Gold Edition goes on sale pretty often, and the price difference between the standard and Gold Edition isn't much. And also thanks to Capcom consistently lowering the prices of their games over time. So there's a good chance the version you're buying or already own includes the DLC. In that case, it's a nice bonus. It lets you revisit the game with a new perspective and Rose's powers, and it adds a small narrative extension. But if you have already played the main story and you're only curious on how the story of the DLC ties with the main ending, you could just watch a recap or cutscene compilation online and skip playing the DLC entirely. It's not like you are missing a lot of the story if you don't play the DLC. It's just like a nice addition to the actual ending of RE8. So in short, the Shadows of Rose DLC is not essential, but it's a decent little extra, especially if you're grabbing the Gold Edition anyway.
I'm tired of being a freak. I want to have friends. I want to live a normal life without this curse.
The performance was excellent with great visuals to back it up. My specs are listed in the description, and you can also see the MSI Afterburner running in the top left corner of the screen. Just for comparison, going from RE7 to RE8, I noticed about a 20% drop in performance, but it wasn't really noticeable during gameplay. I was consistently hitting around 200 FPS with a 5700X 3D and a 4070 Super. I also tested the game with and without ray tracing, and as you can see in the background, even with ray tracing enabled, the game still ran at 200 FPS indoors, though GPU usage dropped significantly. It went from like 99, or well, 100% of the GPU being used to hit those 200 FPS down to around 40 to 50%, or basically half of the GPU power to hit that 200 FPS limit that I have. Because for some reason I prefer to play games that don't max out the GPU, and since I didn't notice much visual difference with ray tracing on, I ended up playing the whole game without it. For more context, I played on the prioritized graphics preset, which is just below the ray tracing preset at 1080p, and as I mentioned, the game held a smooth 200 FPS most of the time. I capped my FPS for every single game at 200 FPS through the NVIDIA control panel because my monitor is 144 Hz, so going beyond that point or around that point is kind of pointless. But I still like to have that sort of wiggle room between 144 to 200 to make sure it is like stable in that section. Overall, performance was fantastic. The RE engine or Moon engine is seriously impressive, and I've never had any performance issues in Resident Evil Village.
Hey, are you listening? Hey! What the?
As a habit, I like to record a quote-unquote from launch to play section for games, because between launching the game, adjusting the settings and everything before actually playing the game, there are usually a few things I wish I had known before buying. But with this one, everything is very straightforward, no weird input delays or anything I regret not knowing beforehand. So also, once again, shout out to Capcom for making their games work smoothly across platforms, unlike some other companies, some other games like with Unreal Engine 5, which is a mess. But yeah, from launching the game to playing the game, there are no standout issues and everything worked as expected. Resident Evil Village is a solid 9 out of 10 for me. I know that's a rating many people might not agree with, mostly because of the writing, the loose ends, and some of the nonsensical moments in the story. But honestly, I was surprised after watching other reviews to see how negative some of them were. My experience was actually remarkable. The distinct characters and their corresponding areas were genuinely memorable. The village itself had a layout I really enjoyed exploring, and the biggest highlight for me was definitely the art design. And well, add to that the satisfying gameplay, the introduction of new weapons through the Duke, and the gradual improvements across the story. It all gave me a feeling that's the closest I've had to what Resident Evil 4 made me feel when I first played it. Of course, the game isn't perfect, mainly due to the writing and dialogue, but I honestly think the criticism it gets, it's overblown. The gameplay, in my opinion, is nearly perfect. The art direction, for my taste, is perfect. The performance is outstanding, especially in a time where we see so many poorly optimized games, and there are tons of small touches and details that made me consistently enjoy my time with Resident Evil Village.